Okay, I got it.
You did?
Yes.
Yay! Here we are. Everyone's in the back. It is like school to whoever I said it's not like school because you're on the back row. Hello, welcome. Actually, I have a little thing right there. So yeah, and we'll share that one. This is how shit gets done in Denver. It's a little event that actually started out of Hope Tank because all good things in my life in Denver start out of Hope Tank. So Erica, do you want to say a little bit about where we are?
Oh,
About this place?
sure. Do I?
You should come up here and do it on the mic.
Yeah.
So the people online can hear you.
Yeah.
I think if you stand behind Shannon, the cameras will get you too.
Oh, even better.
Audio unmuted.
She's always behind me.
It's not in, yeah, it's in.
Yeah, well, welcome. Silence your phones. We are at Hope Tank. We were in Baker for 10 years, and we are now here in, oh my God, okay, I apologize. Also, if you know me, this is standard. So we have been here for about 6 months in our new space, and we are here in, some are calling it Whittier, some are calling it different parts, City Park West. I'm still getting the gist. And what's cool about our new space is that we really wanted to have a community space because that was something that we were asked for constantly, which we couldn't really provide in our old space. So folks can rent this space. We are only open to the public on Sundays because we have moved everything online. So we're doing gift boxes. We work with all kinds of small business owners for our boxes, for gifts, for events. And then folks can utilize this space to really activate whatever. So it might be a workshop, it might be a body movement class, it might be something like this. We have folks doing board meetings here. Yeah, so we're pumped to have this. It's like the second real event that we've done with Shannon here, and there are many more to come. So thanks for being here.
Yay! Yeah, and so when I first worked for Erica, we would sit and actually we would do a bunch of community events, and Erica would say, we just need a chart that shows how shit gets done in Denver. And then several years later I was like, I'm gonna do that. And I need to use that title that you came up with because you're so much better at marketing than I am. So yeah, so we've done, this is our 4th event. And this is the local Ballot initiative event. So welcome to all of you here in the space and those of you online. What do I also want to acknowledge? I also want to acknowledge that we are on Arapaho Ute and Cheyenne land, and to honor the original stewards of this space. And that this event is important to me because I love learning, and I think that we should do a lot of learning in public. That sometimes can be intimidating because the world wants us to or we feel pressure to be perfect, but actually I think it's really important that we learn out loud and together. So that's actually a big part of this, is that we not only learn about these ballot initiatives, but how all of these organizations got on this ballot that has been mailed to you. So that if you want to do that yourself, you might know some options of how you can do that. It's not a debate, and because last year people were like, why didn't you invite the opposition? This is a people-powered event to support, people.
Welcome.
So we are gonna, I know we got started a little late, but we're gonna still adhere to our timeline. So we have some questions, and then we'll take some audience questions, and we'll wrap up, and then there'll be time to talk to these folks if you want to sign up for anything, take some lit, and you can also shop, and they get a 10% discount if you buy tonight. So lots of fun. Cool. So that's the game plan. Sound good? Awesome. So we're just gonna go down the row, and if you can say your name, pronouns, and oh, I didn't say that. My name is Shannon Hoffman, and I use she, her pronouns. So name, pronouns, your measure, and why you support it, maybe what you're hearing about opposition, and what's the rebuttal. I know that's like 4 things, but.
All right, I guess I'm kicking it off. I'm Jill Locantore. I use she, her pronouns. I'm with the Denver Deserves Sidewalks campaign. So this ballot initiative would publicly fund the construction and repair of sidewalks citywide. You may not know that today it is entirely up to the adjacent private property owner to build sidewalks in the first place and to do any needed repairs, which is sort of like asking homeowners to fill the potholes and pave the street in front of their house. It turns out that's a terrible way to build functional infrastructure. So today, 40% of Denver streets either have no sidewalk at all, or a sidewalk that's too skinny to accommodate a wheelchair or a parent with a stroller. Some untold number of sidewalks on top of that are in serious disrepair. So that makes it hard for all of us to safely walk around Denver, but particularly people with disabilities, older adults, parents with children, and low-income households, many of whom depend on walking to get to transit and other daily destinations. And actually, low-income neighborhoods are the least likely to have complete, well-maintained sidewalks. Also, the current policies that require adjacent property owners to pay for sidewalk repairs can be a huge financial burden. It can be thousands of dollars or even tens of thousands of dollars to do those repairs. So the initiative would remove the responsibility from adjacent private property owners for doing sidewalk repairs and put that squarely on the city, just like the city maintains other basic infrastructure. It would fund the construction and maintenance of sidewalks through a modest annual fee that would be charged to all property owners in Denver. With that sustained dedicated funding source, we could build out a complete sidewalk network in just 9 years, compared to the current trajectory we are on with the meager public funding available for sidewalks. It would literally take us 400 years to have a complete sidewalk network. And it would also provide ongoing funding for sidewalk repairs in perpetuity. So adjacent property owners would never have to worry about it again, just like you don't have to worry about filling potholes or fixing the storm sewers in front of your house. Do you want me to talk about opposition, or did I take up enough time?
They have one sign that I saw. I was telling Jill earlier that someone had made a homemade sign that said no on 307, but other than that, you don't have.
We don't have organized opposition. We do have a city council member, a former Denver mayor, and the Denver Post editorial board who have vocally spoken out against this initiative. The primary concerns are about the fee. Is that going to be too burdensome on property owners? Is it fairly structured? It sparked a lot of conversation about how do we pay for infrastructure? How do we pay for our streets? How do we pay for other basic things? And is that fair compared to the way we've structured the sidewalk fee? And the other concern is sidewalks are complicated, which I regret to tell you is true. For something as basic as just a concrete strip, it can be incredibly complicated because you have to deal with maybe stormwater issues or underground utilities or right-of-way acquisition. That is all true, but we believe if we have a sustained dedicated funding source and the mandate from the voters that we can figure out all of those challenges and meaningfully address Denver's sidewalk problem in a meaningful amount of time and not 400 years. Okay, so I will hand it off to Ren.
Cool. Testing. Is this good? Okay. Hi. I'm just gonna keep talking. I'm Ren, she, her pronouns. I am here with No Eviction Without Representation, which is Initiative 305 on your ballot. Basically what this one would do is to provide free universal legal representation for all tenants facing eviction in Denver. Because the way that eviction works right now is around 9,000 people a year get kicked out of their homes, basically summarily and automatically, because less than 1% of tenants actually have legal representation, about 75% of them don't even show up to court, and so judges typically are passing these cases automatically to default judgment without even really talking to the tenant, looking at the details, and that has serious consequences for a lot of those people, right? People lose jobs, they lose health care, they wind up with these eviction records, especially that Now with more of the rental market than ever, being these big real estate companies that have these automatic screening processes, it just makes it almost impossible to find somewhere else to live, because nobody will rent to you, so a huge proportion of people become homeless as a result of eviction. And that's the thing we're trying to stop, because it turns out when you actually show up to court with a lawyer, you win most of the time. And so there's other cities that have done things like this, like, providing universal right to counsel. And what that does typically is you see the eviction rate just shoot down afterward by like more than 50%. So that's what we're hoping to achieve here to keep people in their homes. It's funded by a $75 yearly tax paid out by landlords to ensure, one, that the people who are evicting people are also the ones responsible for paying to help resolve that problem and ensure that those people have a right to a fair trial, just like you'd already have in a criminal case. But then also because, landlords can afford it, unlike renters who are struggling. Our opposition, shockingly, is big real estate industry, right? The Apartment Owners Association has a few things to say about it. I'm not honestly gonna address most of that because I think a lot of it's just lies. But the one thing that I will address is I think a lot of people are concerned about that fee being passed on to renters, right? Which is a real risk that we have to worry about. First of all, the reason that could happen is because we have too few protections for tenants, right? Which is the problem that we're trying to solve. But for sure, renters are already struggling to pay their rent, right? So the risk then is if that $75 fee got passed on to the tenants, which will happen in some cases probably, that would mean you're paying an extra $6.25 a month in your rent, which is probably less than 1% of what your rent already is. But meanwhile, for that same fee, you'd be getting the benefits of the program, right? Which means you'd have a more than 50% chance of staying in your home if you can't pay your rent, right? Including that same $6. So, for $6 a month, you'd be getting the chance that realistically, right, you're probably already struggling to pay your rent, and that would be much less catastrophic if it happens. You'd have a much higher chance of staying in your home and being able to not have that be a disaster for you. Go, Brian.
Thanks, Ryan. My name's Brian, he, him. I represent ballot measure 306, Waste No More Denver. It is, just out of curiosity with the room here, how many of you live in houses? So roughly half the room, for those online, live in houses. In the county of Denver, all houses receive trash services and recycling services. Currently, recycling is done on a bi-weekly basis, and people who live in houses have access to compost service for a monthly fee. City and County of Denver this year changed it so that in January of 2023, beginning in January of 2023, all houses will have access to composting and recycling infrastructure, as well as trash hauling on a weekly basis. This impacts about 180,000 consumers in Denver County on an annual basis. Denver County, however, has 31 million people who come to Denver and consume things, creating waste. For the 31 million people who come to our county and consume, we want to make sure that they have the access to recycle and compost their byproducts of consumption as equally as those who live in houses. Currently in Colorado state law, the responsibility for managing trash services and other materials is limited by state law. Municipal haulers, the cities, the government agencies are only allowed to handle households, and there are actual state statutes that require that commercial haulers handle the commercial services. So Waste No More is designed to phase in over about 5 years an infrastructure system with at minimum bilingual education, so that all who eat, play, or live in Denver County have access to feeling good about disposing of their waste in environmentally responsible ways. Our measure is going to impact places like Ball Arena, Coors, the baseball stadium, Coors Field, yeah, thank you. Mile High, places, where people play, the sporting venues and all that. Large commercial properties, apartment buildings with 75 units or more in the first year. And then it'll phase in so that smaller and smaller organizations will become required to have these infrastructure services available. This does a couple of things. One, it helps to establish a footprint of the infrastructure, the vehicles moving around the city, picking up the waste. So that as the smaller businesses come into line with it, the price point has reduced because more people have access and are using it on a regular and consistent basis. It also allows for small businesses like the one that we're in to co-op with their neighbors so that trash services could be combined with the 2 or 3 businesses or in a block or in a section of buildings, so they can share those resources together, and each individual business isn't required to have its own recycling bin or compost bin. And of course, there are allowances. Some places might self-haul their compost to their houses, like many people who go to work do and take their food back to their homes to get it composted. Our opposition is the Chamber of Commerce and a variety of businesses who have switched their funding and efforts and focus from Waste No More to our friends at Newer. It's the same opposition group, publicly registered with Denver elections. So their arguments are it's expensive and it's gonna take up parking spaces or a little bit of room in parking lots or other spaces where the business utilizes the waste stream. We wanna say and really point out that diverting everything from the landfill to have access to recycling and composting will allow businesses to reduce the size of their trash cans and make space for recycled materials. Also in large apartment buildings and other commercial properties where the trash hauler comes and picks up the trash dumpsters multiple times a week, those multiple times a week haulings can be and will be done in more cases by the recycling truck than it will be by the landfill destined truck.
Hello everyone, Lenny Hansen. I'm here with the 2I campaign, which is the Denver Public Library. We are actually looking to raise $32 million a year to help fund the library. It's already funded by the general fund of the city, but it just really isn't meeting services. I don't know if you know, but only one library is open on a Sunday. That's it. And none of the libraries are open after 6 p.m. So if you're of need of some of the services that the library can provide, you pretty much usually need them after 6 p.m. And so this additional money would go to increasing hours, providing additional services, including in different languages. So currently the library does a decent job of having several languages, but they certainly do not meet the need of many of our community members across all of Denver. Also the staff, they're grossly underpaid. Most of them are way under market wage. And so some of the money would go to help get them up to a market-based wage as well. This is actually, when you get $32 million a year, it's because every homeowner would be paying about $4.19 a month. That's what we're calling the typical Denver homeowner. If anybody wants to know exactly if they own a home, what their property tax increase would be, you can go on our website, strongdenver.org, and we have a calculator for you to look up your actual home, and then you could figure out what it would cost you specifically. But at $4.19 a month, with all the homeowners going together, it's $32 million a year, which makes a really big difference for the libraries. We have no opposition, maybe except for somebody who decided to send out a mailer at the last minute, but it's not opposition, it was the government. And other than that, pretty much I will tell you, we've been out walking with 50 plus people every weekend, and I think the biggest question we get at the doors is just how is it funded? Because when you read the ballot language, 1.5 mil, not everybody knows what a mil is. So thank you, Tabor, for that piece, but a mil is actually your property tax. And so this would be one of the first times Denver as a city has looked at increasing property taxes in almost 25 years. Outside of, we do them for schools, but for the Denver as a city, we typically go after sales tax. And one of the things that was really considered by the group that put this on the ballot was that sales taxes are pretty regressive. And also our sales taxes are starting to get pretty high here in Denver. And so wanted to take a different approach, and also libraries across the state are actually funded by property tax. They're not typically necessarily part of the government and inside of the government general fund. So that is probably the two things we get the most questions about. I think I got all of the questions.
Yeah. Thank you all. Great. What I want to dive into for all of our learning is how you got on the ballot. And so in the charter, there's two ways you can get on the ballot, through city council or through petition. And I also shared that because like part of how shit gets done started as a little mini podcast about the city charter and reading it and trying to talk to people about it. So I know that some of you had to like try multiple times via petition. Some went right through with petition, and then one is through council. So can you each talk about your initiative's journey to the ballot, and then next part we can talk about, you know, there's like two parts of the campaign, right? Then what is it like in the second part? Because the hope is that if you're here watching at home and you're thinking, hey, maybe we could do that, you could learn a little bit of how you can do it. You wanna start with the council
Alright.
part?
I'm the oddball out. We're the ones that went through the council process. So as I just explained, the library is part of the city. So we actually, just over a year ago now, put together, so the library also has a nonprofit funding partner with them. It's the Friends Foundation. And so the Friends Foundation put together a commission of people all across the city of Denver to look at, does the library have enough funding? Yes or no? And if the answer is no, what kind of funding do they need? And then where would that funding come from? And so we actually put that together. That group met for almost 9 months and then released a recommendation to city council and to the mayor. What I will say, and I may be pre-jumping these guys as they get ready to talk about why they went signature, but part of what made us choose to go through the city government process and through city council to get on the ballot is because we are a city entity. And so what you have to do in order to do that is you find a council champion. Several of you have used the same champion as us for some of your initiatives, and that's Councilman Clark. So Councilman Clark, Councilman Hines, and Councilwoman Sawyer, and Councilwoman Torres, Council President now, Torres, all jumped on with us and helped us work through the process. You wanted me to talk through that process, right? And so this process is actually harder than you think. Getting through council is not sort of like the, oh, you just go get them to vote yes and you move through. You actually sort of work on an ordinance for about 2 months, 3 months. You then send it over to their attorney, they look at it, they come back with edits. You go to council committee for the first time. You'll go to a second council committee, and then you have to go through 2 readings at council. This process is actually in the process. See, it is a lot of process of getting changed by council. So while I could walk through all of that timeline with you, they are about to vote to change it, and that is because of something that we actually just did, and I've done several times when I take things through council, and that's that you wait until the late summer to actually get it put on the ballot, which puts council in a tough position because they're having to do something really late, and we bump up right against the timeline of when you have to have something done to get on the ballot. So it pushes them into making some decisions, sometimes faster than they would like. So there will actually be a new process. So I won't go through the timelines, but that is what they are working on right now. And will be part of what the new council is starting to take on, is how do they sort of take some of these issues on earlier in order to have more robust discussion around them.
Okay. Waste No More started its process back, I think it was about 2016, through the signature gathering of the Green Roofs Initiative. So Waste No More is a citizens-led effort with, where we gathered signatures from county residents over a period of time. that started the signature gathering we started last summer, but the writing and the creation of Waste No More started back during the Green Roofs Initiative. The co-author for Waste No More is Ian Tafoya. Many of you may know him for his activism and environmental justice roles. He's also a candidate for Denver mayor in the next election. And as the people were getting, many of our core team were part of the Green Roofs Initiative, and everybody's like, well, why do I care if my apartment building is cleaning the air or has solar panels on it? I don't even have recycling in my building. Recycling being a greater direct action for climate change, on an individual responsibility level. So after the Green Roofs Initiative, the ballot measure goes through a very similar process when it starts. Committee forms, start talking about ideas, writing it up. Really is writing a law, statutorily. And so you look at the timelines that you think you're gonna be on the ballot so that you can kind of figure when you're gonna start, which is one of the things we did on our measure wrong, because we pegged an exact date instead of like an effective date or timeline after it passed. But I'll touch on that in a second, because for our measure, we're had lawyers review, you submit it to the city. And I'm sure I'll leave some things for y'all to touch on, it gets approved or goes through the process, and basically have to go out and get signatures. With our measure, the thing that was really different was that there was two measures put up at the same time. One, to have regulations on oil and gas and fracking, if I remember correctly, and in the county, and then this recycling measure. And one of them got partially funded, and then the recycling measure didn't get any like citizen funding, like, yeah, I really wanna help make that happen. And the measure, Ian and I was one of the main signature gatherers out there. And Ian and I sat down one day, had a conversation, he said, we're gonna pull it. We're gonna shelve it for down the road. Because with COVID and the kind of events that were going on, it was really hard to get signatures. And I convinced him to let me have it. And I was blessed to have some really energetic volunteers and members of the community. And we did some things that were unconventional. Instead of going door to door or hanging out in parks, we went to Levitt Pavilion the most. And why? Because Levitt Pavilion, as a city property, is a venue that has recycling for its consumers. And wouldn't it be great to go to every venue and have a recycling bin like you do at Levitt Pavilion? Was our biggest ask. And everybody bought into it. Everyone loved it. But as you'll hear, we didn't get on the ballot. We didn't get the signatures required in the timeline to get on the 2021 ballot. So fortunately for the city of Denver, there's an extension window that they have that, like, if you're getting signatures, you don't get it in the 21 ballot or that year's ballot. If you get the minimum number of signatures required in the time period stated, it'll go on the next election. And so that's what happened with Waste No More, is that we got our signatures last year, and then we had to wait until this November's election. The last thing I'm gonna say before I pass it on is that our measure is going to be modified. We already know that there is gonna be a committee that includes city council, that will include that beautiful Chamber of Commerce and others that are in our oppositions. And there'll be modifications. Some of the most basic modifications are gonna be because when voted on as a win, November 7th, the technicality is that will already be in effect. But we know that can't be. So it'll get modified and adjusted by council. And with that, I'm gonna pause, so I'm gonna give it all away.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so for newer, we also did the signature gathering thing. Basically what that process looks like is you, as Brian said, you write a law, right? We had our lawyer draft it, we based ours on There was a similar no eviction without representation measure that passed in Boulder in 2019. We talked to the lawyer who wrote that, and we sort of tweaked that to modify it for Denver in a couple different ways. You send that to the city, then you have to have a meeting with the city attorney where they sort of go through it and give you advice on what they think you should change. You can choose to reject those or accept those. And then you have to gather signatures. It's, X percentage of the people who voted in the previous election, valid signatures from voters. So for us, that was, I think, 9,000 something valid signatures, which the word valid is very important there, as it turns out. And so we did that in 2021 last year. We also, like Waste No More, were shooting for the 2021 ballot, but we didn't have time to do that. It was just that the timeline that they give you is too tight, particularly because we were very, very concerned about some of the technical details in the drafting of the legal language, so we sort of took too long to do that, and then wound up not having enough time to make the 2021 ballot. I think it's important for people to understand. Okay. That the whole process is kind of rigged, frankly. It's designed so that it takes money, basically, to get something on the ballot. It's really, it is easiest. I think last year we saw millions of dollars in dark money pour into the ballot with some of these initiatives that were essentially just bought. Whereas meanwhile we tried to do it the people power way. We had basically no money coming in. And so instead we said at the beginning, we're not going to pay anybody to do this, right? We're going to be out there with people power. We had over 100 volunteers, signature gathering for months, and still we barely made it. And we ended up having to pay some signature gatherers just to push that extra mile, because they rejected more than 30% of our signatures. We submitted over 13,000, and the city took issue with a bunch of them. And it's still, the timelines they give you especially are really, really tight. We ended up submitting very, very close to the deadline. But we made it on the 2022 ballot that way. And so, yeah, here we are.
Denver Deserves Sidewalks was also citizen initiated. It was the culmination of many, many, many years of patient advocacy and then a mad scramble at the end to meet the city's deadlines and requirements. I personally have been working on sidewalks for 7 years, but there are other community members and neighborhood groups that have been calling for better sidewalks in Denver for literally decades. We launched the original Denver Deserves Sidewalks campaign in 2015, and our ask then was exactly the same: to publicly fund the build out and maintenance of our sidewalk network. At that time, we were just doing the old school change.org petition and calling on the mayor and the city council to take action, because the initiative that is on the ballot today, city council could pass that on Monday if they wanted to. It does not require a vote of the people. So that was our original ask, is for the mayor or the city council to act and to take serious action to address our sidewalk problems. We got some tiny little baby wins in 2017. At that time, the city had been spending literally $0 per year on anything related to sidewalks, and thanks to our initial campaign, they started spending about $2 to $3 million on sidewalk construction each year. And that's the funding level I refer to when I say it would take 400 years to build out our sidewalk network. It's just a drop in the bucket compared to the actual need. And the city also went from being completely passive about sidewalk repairs. Like, you literally had to call and turn in your neighbor and say, his sidewalk is broken, and the city would come out and cite your neighbor and force them to do the repairs on their own dime. As a result of our campaign, they started being more proactive, so they would go out without waiting for those complaints to come in and inspect sidewalks and then force people to pay for the repairs, which, as you can imagine, was wildly popular. And the city auditor actually did an assessment of the sidewalk repair program and declared it fundamentally broken and contributing to the inequities in our city. So we revived our Denver Deserves Sidewalks campaign in 2021, I think, and we were, again, just looking to the mayor and the city council to take leadership on this issue, and they just weren't. They just kept saying the timing wasn't right, we're dealing with the trash fee, we're dealing with these other things, they're more important than sidewalks. which is the same line we've been hearing for literally like 20 years, right? So we started kind of threatening a citizen-initiated ballot measure on the hopes that that might scare them into doing their own thing, and it didn't. So at pretty much the last minute, we decided to pull the trigger and do a citizen-initiated push, and it was a mad scramble. We had to do a massive amount of fundraising in a very short time because we too could not solely rely on volunteer signature gathering to get the number of signatures required. We had to hire a firm to do it, and also had tons of volunteers, and also turned it in basically at the very last minute, and thank God qualified for the November ballot.
Can I add one piece real quick? Because I think you both have touched on this, it's very important. These citizens initiatives in the current setup that they are under, virtually impossible to do without citizen funding. Our number, I think the number was 9,000 roughly.
9,001.
Right, right. The particulars, you can't do it online. There are methods where you can walk around with iPads so that you're actually getting the exact voter file. But if you are a registered voter at 1572 Colfax, apartment 7, and that's your exact voter information, but you wrote number 7 in the book, it might not be accepted. If you skip the apartment number, it might not be accepted. If you write 80206 instead of 80205, it gets rejected. So Waste No More, for example, collected nearly 17,000 factual signatures. And when you say to somebody, hey, do you live in the city of Denver? And they're like, yeah, I do. And then they fill it out, and their town says Arvada or Westminster. That's not the city and county of Denver. And so this is a real issue because we got blessed with a $30,000 funding like 4 or 5 weeks before our signatures were due. And we were able to take our volunteers and pay them so they put 3 to 5 times as much time getting signatures and being out there in order to achieve the goal. And so for us on the citizen driven end, it's volunteer, it's grassroots, but it's also that interest, that personal interest funding, that $5, $10 that helps put somebody out there for a little bit of time or gets literature into people's hands. That makes a real and factual difference in getting something on the ballot.
Wait, also, since you said that, I do want to point out, I really liked what you said too, which was that with no eviction without representation as well, this is something that city council could just do, right? I think it's important for people to understand that. They could do that in a week if they wanted to. And so the reason that people are out here pushing these types of citizen-initiated ordinances is because these are things that, for whatever reason, right, political or, whatever you might speculate, right, these are things that the government is not just going to do for us, right? These are things that we have to do for ourselves if we want them to get done. And so, yeah, I mean, I think this process is intentionally inaccessible for a lot of obvious political reasons. So.
Anything to add? No? Okay. Well, and can I show this to people real quick? You should have gotten one of these, and if you're online, we will send it to you, or we can send you a PDF. But this outlines how each of these initiatives got on the ballot, how much money they've raised, and what they're using it for, which I think is really interesting as well. But since we just have a few minutes and then we want to take some audience questions, I know when we were prepping for this, we talked thank you, Jill. We talked a little bit about 2 things, so I guess I'll just let you choose your own adventure of what you would like to talk about when it's your round. But we talked about the modernizing elections and this proposal that was before council but was pulled, where it was going to require a specific percentage of signatures from each district in order to get an initiative on the ballot. And there were many, many organizations that rallied, including ACLU, Clean Slate Now, Colorado Common Cause and said, like, we don't want this. So I would love to hear if folks want to speak to that, any thoughts about that or worries for the foreseeable future. But then the other things we talked about too, like you were talking about, Brian, right? Like, what's the future of these initiatives? Like, what are limitations or what might happen with like tinkering? So, tinkering with these initiatives. So I know I've put 2 questions out there. Choose your own path of what you would like to answer.
Well, I can start and I can talk about what City Council was considering in terms of changing the process for citizen-initiated ordinances. Does anybody remember there was a citizen-initiated ordinance a while ago that wanted to establish a commission that would attempt to communicate with extraterrestrial folks? Do you remember that?
No,
Yes.
I don't. When was this?
It was very weird. And we were all in awe that this got on the ballot, that they managed to collect enough signatures and somehow had funding or something that made it possible for this to get on the ballot. And that's often referred to when people say, well, we need to make it harder for things to get on the ballot. So we're not getting silly stuff like that that's wasting everybody's time. And so they talk about increasing the number of signatures that you need to get, or having signatures required from every single city council district. And yes, that would make it harder to get things on the ballot. It does not mean that we would get better things on the ballot. It means only people who have tons of money could get something on the ballot, and that doesn't mean that you have good ideas. But there are ways that it could actually be made better. One of the things that a few folks mentioned is you have to basically write a law, and then you have to sit down with the city attorney and talk to them about the law that you've written. We were incredibly lucky to have several pro bono lawyers who were working with us, and as a result, I think we have a very well-crafted ordinance. I'm not so arrogant to think that it's absolutely perfect and that we won't want to work with City Council to maybe make some modifications, but it was very well thought through. Not everybody's lucky to have that kind of access to pro bono lawyers. Just like we have the Fair Election Fund that people running for office could tap into, what if we had, a Fair Citizen Initiative Fund that people could tap into to get free legal advice as they're trying to craft these ordinances? And then the other thing is, Brian was talking about how hard it is to get valid signatures. There's so many ways people could fill it out wrong. Well, if you've seen one of these petition forms, it's like the worst designed form. Not somebody who has any skill in like human-centered design. Like we could just redesign the petition form to make it so much easier for people to fill it out correctly. And then we avoid having to collect twice as many signatures as you actually need to get the right number of valid signatures. Who wants to go next?
Yeah, I think you pretty much summed it up for the ballot modernization thing, right? If you make it harder to get on the ballot, that means only people with a lot of money can get on the ballot, and then we know what people with a lot of money put on the ballot. It's mostly garbage. But I'm more interested in the other part of this. So as far as the future of what New Word would look like, I think we sort of designed our initiative in mind that it would be carried out by a government that maybe, doesn't always necessarily have the best interests of tenants in mind, and certainly that also has a lot of, dynamic tensions within it, right? Different departments and different things vying against each other. And so when we were crafting ours, we created all of this sort of oversight infrastructure in place within the initiative that ensures that this program is carried out, right? We had to create a program coordinator position. Turns out that city law restricts who is able to appoint that program coordinator. It has to be the mayor. I don't know if you have met our mayor right now. So we also created a little tenants oversight board to ensure that tenants have a voice in that process, things like that. And then even then, there's a lot of concerns just about the way that this would get implemented, because a lot of it ultimately is going to be up to the city government, and that's just kind of an inevitable facet of this process, right? Is you're crafting a law, and then that law is actually going to be executed and put into practice by the executive branch of the government and all these different organizations that interface with it. And so this comes with a lot of just like logistical issues. Like a lot of people with our initiative, they're asking questions like, where are the lawyers going to come from, right? And the answer for that is that we know that the city already has these contracts with certain legal aid organizations. So we're assuming they will expand them, and we talk to those organizations about what that would look like for them. But the answer ultimately is again, we don't know, because the city has the authority to decide those kinds of things, right? And so that's the kind of stuff that I think anybody who's thinking about putting something on the ballot needs to consider, is like, what that actually is going to, what the logistics of putting into practice are gonna look like, and especially who is in charge of those things, because that is not the kind of thing that you necessarily have control over when you're running a ballot initiative.
Thanks, it's really powerful. I hope that, and I'm just gonna say this real quick. After this goes into effect, we're gonna need citizen monitors to be sitting in the courtrooms and watching to make sure this works correctly.
Right.
Just like we've caught our own city's public defender system being operated in violation of state law, and they had to get their stuff together in the last couple of years. I wanna talk about the election, the ballot modernization process. For those of you who don't know, most agencies in our government have citizen oversight groups. Elections went through a citizen oversight. There's a ballot measure on your ballot that was crafted through citizens, former clerk and recorders from the city and county of Denver, the current clerk and recorder. And this little thing that Shannon was mentioning, so I'm gonna bring Ian up again, cause he actually was on the Citizens Oversight Board for modernizing the ballot. And I attended a couple of meetings as a licensed legal signature gatherer, an electioneer in the state of Colorado. So this is like the 6th or 7th measure, so I got the signatures for all 3 of us. Even though the Citizens Oversight Group went through this process and crafted in a consensus what the updated law should look like, the individual city council representative didn't get a thing they wanted into the legislative piece. And so they went around into other into other council groups and got it brought before council as a council measure instead of a citizens, or, I guess that, measure. So what does a quantum look like? A percentage of registered voters from each council district. Blood quantums are often considered racist in our history, right? You have to have X amount of blood to be considered, white, for example, as part of our history. So restricting the number of people from each council district, it's all about finances. It's all about about the money that it takes to get a ballot measure forward. And ballot measures can just be directly paid for. There was one that was eventually pulled from our ballot this year called MySpark, and it was a marijuana tax. And it was a single entity that dropped, I wanna say about $200,000, if I remember correctly, to one organization to fund, gather the signatures, do all the things to get this on the ballot. It was a special interest group. So organizations like that are never gonna have a problem using the technology, the software, paying people to go door to door and find their targets to meet the minimum quantities needed per, right? But that math and that time takes accounting, it takes staff, it takes money. And so I and Ian were also people who fought very aggressively. I had conversations with and letters to every single council representative, and swayed a couple of them, I think, to help get the effort withdrawn so that it's not on your ballot. And I wanna say that because I truly believe that when green roofs got passed, they like doubled the number of signatures required. But this one on the ballot is an effort that was done through oversight of the community and with consensus. And it is, because I have it in my hand, called 2L, the Change to Election Procedures. And that was something that I think we as a community could support.
So since we got choose your own adventure, I'm gonna just choose a little bit of a different adventure.
Oh.
So we talked a little bit about you could have gotten something through council. And the way to tell that on your ballot is actually the type of font that is used. So if your ballot question is in all capital letters, that means it's required by Tabor and the people have to vote on it. That means council could not have done it without the voters. If the question is in, they call that proper capitalization, so a capital letter and then lower letters, that means that council could have done it on their own. And so often that actually helps you when you're reading your ballot. I, of course, is the one who has the capital letter one that requires the voters, hates it, because it says shall taxes be increased by $36 million annually. It starts that way, which is horrible, but that's required by Tabor. But just as you're thinking about how to look at your ballot and think about where it came from, that is one way to look at it and to sort of take that in and think about where did it come from? Could council have done it by themselves or could they not have? And it just helps you know a little bit more about where it came from and gives you a little bit more intel.
Can you say that one more time? Just to be
Capital
clear.
letters,
So
all caps
Okay.
means Tabor, it's a Tabor issue, which means council could not do it without the voters.
Okay.
And then proper capitalization means that they could have, because it could have done it in an ordinance without increasing. So, yours is a fee,
Correct.
and fees can be done by council.
Got it.
Mine is a tax, mine cannot be done by council, it can only be done by voters.
That's
But it's
interesting.
so hard to follow all of that and to read the ballot titles,
Right.
that often just the capitalization of the ballot is a good way to sort of know. You still should do your own research and do more into it,
Yeah.
but it's that good, first you look at it and it helps you know where it came from.
Yes.
Nothing on that. Yeah, so that's as you're saying, a lot of that is about taxes, right? Tabor is this law that at the state level that restricts what we can do with taxes, and for taxes you have to go to the ballot. It also means if you're ever wondering why every tax is so confusingly written on the ballot and they put right at the beginning, shall taxes be raised, and the thing that it actually does is buried 60 paragraphs deep. That's because of Tabor. We are required to write it that way. So the actual language that you'll see on the ballot for newer, we were restricted very closely on what we had to put there. Actually, we didn't get to decide that. That's all that kind of stuff has to do with Tabor, basically.
And frustrating.
Absolutely, it's terrible. It's confusing.
Thank you all. We're a little bit over, but I think we're good. Why don't do we have any questions from folks that are here in person? Yeah,
Do we want to do some?
sure. Can they, okay. I feel like a talk show host.
I'm Brandon, he, him pronouns. So I haven't done a lot of research on the eviction without representation. On my way here, I told somebody I was coming here, and they said that they heard that the tenant doesn't get representation until after the eviction. Can you speak to that?
That's not. I'm
That's
not
in-
sure
that-
what
is that
they mean.
inaccurate?
I guess that's not true. I mean, actually, here. That's not true. I don't know what they were talking about, but what you just said is definitely not true. So
Okay.
the way that it would work basically is at the beginning of the process. So actually before they're even in the court system, when you get the notice on your door that says demand for payment of possession, they would have to be informed both then and at when they sign the lease as well. The landlord would have to inform you that you have a right to an attorney, and they would have to give you a phone number. If you can't afford an attorney, call this number and you can access one.
Cool.
And as to whether or not people are being referred into the program, which is really what we want, that's gonna depend on some of the implementation details. But yeah, either way, people will have the lawyer when they're going through that process, right?
Great.
But to that, maybe I heard your question a little differently. They wouldn't have that lawyer necessarily if they didn't go out and seek it themselves until that sign was put on the door that says you're late on your rent, you gotta pay.
Well, they wouldn't have it before then, but they wouldn't be in the court system before then anyway. Right, that's true.
Thank you.
For those of you who have led council-led initiatives, obviously these are people that are busy, they have a lot of people vying for their attention. What's a good technique to get your letter noticed? What sorts of things do they tend to be sympathetic to? I realize that changes as the personnel changes, but those of you who had success kind of breaking through and getting some attention, I'm just curious what you can say as far as kind of what worked.
Thank you. I guess that's me.
Yeah.
So I need to take one hat off to be able to answer this question, and that is the 2I campaign hat, and put on my, I haven't told you yet, but this is what I do for a profession. And so I run political campaigns and do communications as a job. And so I'm going to answer it, but I just need to take that 2I hat off. So I have run a ballot initiative pretty much every year for like, I don't know, almost 12 years now. And the vast majority of them have gone through council. And the reason why is typically it actually sparks with something that a council member cares about. So you find that person, so I'm just gonna use Councilman Clark as a great example. We've done the climate change tax that happened, the parks tax that happened, and now the library tax, and those have been like the last 3 that we just did. We worked with Councilwoman Knech on the homeless tax. So it's usually sparked by something that they care about, but they're not exactly sure how they wanna write that or how they want it to work, and they don't have enough time to do it by themselves. And so that sort of is when we come in and help them try to figure that out and work with folks, and that's why you heard me talk about pulling together like the commission, is to try to get what is being done beforehand through the process that these 3 folks took, and we're doing it sort of a little bit ass backwards. I won't lie about that, like you have to catch an attention, then you come in and bring in people who can help you answer the question and get it through council. The one thing I think that is different that I probably should have chosen on my Choose Your Own Adventure is we typically don't have any modifications done to our ordinances after they're passed. And that's just because they already went through council once, and so they've already had any modifications that were probably gonna happen when you went through that process. So it just is a little different. But the hardest part is finding that right person, and it usually comes from finding the person on council and then them working their other council members, because they can get each other's attention a lot faster and easier than we do.
Lauren, were there some questions online?
Yeah, on YouTube. Were there any more in the room before I give everyone a chance?
I had one, but it might be gone. I don't have a specific person in mind to answer this, so whoever feels appropriate. I've been imagining for each of your initiatives that there are people, there are voters in Denver that would vote no for either being, in general, either being too progressive or too conservative, right? That because of the nature of these initiatives, you have to sort of balance where you think something will pass, even if there are people who would sit in a room with you and hope for the same things as you and say that doesn't go far enough or that's not the way to do it. And how have you all sort of found that balance and had the right conversations with the right groups?
Sorry, well, this is a big question for us, right, because I think, the housing crisis is this huge looming disaster, right, and I think it's clear that Newer is one tiny step in this process to fixing that, right, in many ways objectively doesn't go far enough, right, and so we chose this method in part because, a lot of those conversations can be resolved that way when the methodology that you're using is something that feels very basic as a reform to people. And I mean, talking about legal representation, right, that's a basic civil right. And so be using that as the mechanism, right, where again, like I think our goal very explicitly is to reduce the number of unjust evictions and just of evictions in general, because those would lead to homelessness, right? But whereas if we tried to say, oh, it's illegal to evict people, that would never have passed at this level, right? But by using legal representation as the mechanism there, we're able to have those conversations more about like, shouldn't we have more regulations and protections for renters? And then that's a really different conversation, and so that was a big part of the reason that we did this the way that we did.
I'll read some from YouTube
Yeah.
maybe? Did anyone else?
No, YouTube.
Okay, cool. Okay, well, thank you to everyone online for asking your questions. So I'm looking on the YouTube chat, not the Facebook event, 'cause I didn't see any there, so if you have something pop over to YouTube, the link is in the Facebook event. The first question, I don't know if it's Janice or Janice, asking, will 306 ensure that a higher percentage of recyclable materials actually get recycled? I've seen info that less than 10% of what's picked up is actually recycled, and then there were some other comments about.
Oh, great,
that.
I love this question. Alright, so, it's been sticking in the back of my head that I need to also say that our ballot measure could have just been done by Dottie Department of Transportation and Infrastructure, who are responsible for the rules for waste hauling citywide, not just on municipal properties. And our initiative is modeled after 20+ years of government officials and their commitments. But to answer the question, we did not write a measure that says that every citizen is mandated to put their compost in a compost bin, their recycling in a recycling bin, and their trash in a trash can. The idea is that the infrastructure has to be available. Now, if you've been to Red Rocks, if you've been to Levitt Pavilion, at the end of the day, you've seen the recycling bins overflowing. People in Colorado want to do the right thing. Having access to it is the issue. The other part of it is the education. A lot of people from Colorado and the Denver city come from different parts of the world. And like in Illinois, where I lived, in Wisconsin, when I grew up, recycling was mandatory. In Chicago, they used bags to put their recycling into recycling bins. In Denver, we don't use plastic bags in our recycling stream. So one of the arguments against it is contamination. We believe that things will actually end up in the right place for several reasons. One is that our measure requires education. The buildings, the locations, the bins themselves. When you walk into a Legal Pete's and you're done and you're gonna put your stuff in a bin, the compost bin is gonna be labeled, so you can choose to use it correctly. But here's the other aspect of it. Businesses like at the Denver International Airport, when the composting is required, they're gonna phase a change in the way they build their packaging, their to-go food, things like that. So right now, you can go to a lot of businesses across the county, and you can get, even at a food truck, a compost food container or food boat, to-go container. Styrofoam's being phased out of our state in the next couple years, so that's gonna help. But then your ramekin for your sauce is single-use plastic and not biodegradable. And when we got Civic Center Eats to go 3-stream, this was one of the things that we had to work with the food trucks to help them understand. The fork, the ramekin, the food container, when they're all compostable, they'll be disposed of properly. Because somebody's gonna be like, I'm done with my lunch, boom, and they threw it in the compost bin because it's all compostable. Right? There are still gonna be people who choose to throw everything in the landfill. And that's their individual rights, right? But for most of us, we feel good when our aluminum and our glass gets put in those bins. And I want to state this as well. In the metro region, we have local aluminum, paper, glass, recycling. Pepsi is moving out to the airport, and part of their new facility is going to be taking plastic bottles locally consumed and processing them into new bottles. The corporations are changing their model from global recycling practices back to localized infrastructure. And this is one of the great things in this day and age, and this is the right time for this, because the infrastructure that we have regionally helps support that.
I think let's do one more question from there, and then, yeah. And we will try to,
We already addressed the capital letters, thank you. Yeah, you all addressed the capital letter thing, thank you, that was very illuminating, a lot of people were wondering that. Oh, someone asked, are there any other ballot initiatives you're aware of that are horrible or amazing? And I know these are all the local ones, but are there state ones anyone wants to comment on?
Ooh, I'll take that one. So, I can't remember the exact number, maybe somebody's got a book, but there's a statewide measure on psilocybin right now.
122.
122. And for those of you who are like, yes, psilocybin is a good thing and it's good for the people, I'd like you to know that the initiative as written is designed for capitalism, and it is not recognizing the indigenous cultures or the deep-rooted internal harmony of being in relationship with plants, with nature, with yourself. And it is written in a way that is designed to make it a corporate capitalistic consumption practice. And so I personally am against 122. It was a measure that was written, designed originally to be in harmony, and it was split in half. So there were two measures. One got financially funded because it was gonna make people rich, and one was withdrawn because it didn't get the funding, because it included the harmonious relationship with nature and the plants that we would consume. So 122 is definitely one that I think is ridiculous.
Sure. 121, which is the income tax cut.
Oh, yeah, obviously, fuck that.
Evidently, I don't need to say anymore. Red got that one. It actually sometimes reads well because people think it will cut down what they pay in income tax, but frankly, the reason you see all these ballot initiatives in capital letters is because we just don't have enough money in our budget to actually pay for the things that we all care about.
Right.
So taking more money out of our budget is really just taking money out of your K-12 and higher education. And so that's a really bad one.
But doesn't it also like just primarily impact like the top 5% of wage earners in the state, with the ultra wealthy?
I don't know if it's 5%, but yes, there's.
Something like that. I didn't wanna use the 1% occupy.
And also, I don't know all the details about this, but there's, at the state level ballot right now, there's a bunch of initiatives about liquor licensing and liquor corporations. Basically, a lot of those are designed to undermine local liquor businesses and provide monopolies for these big liquor distributors. There's a lot of outside money going into those, so you should read up on those ones before you think about voting yes on that. It's just more going on there.
I guess the one I could speak to a little bit is 123, which is about dedicating funding for affordable housing. And frankly, I'm not like totally unqualified in my support for it. It would allow the city to keep the Tabor refund in years when we have an excess of tax and use that to pay for affordable housing, which is desperately needed. In years when there would not be a Tabor refund, it means they might have to dip into funding from other things like K-12 education, which is unfortunate. But I think a reason to consider supporting it is this is the first time ever since I've paid attention to this issue that the state has considered affordable housing an important issue to be addressing at the state level. And it absolutely has to be addressed at the state level. Trying to address affordable housing at the city level or leaving it up to municipalities to do what's needed to provide affordable housing is not gonna cut it. So I personally am probably gonna vote for it just because I wanna send a message to our state legislators that this is an issue that they should be paying attention to and seeking solutions to at the state level.
Great. Could I do one that's a yes? I feel like we did a lot of no's, except for you've got the numbers. Is it JK?
The climate tax and the homeless tax for the city?
Yeah, J and
Oh,
K.
yeah.
So remember I talked about all those capital letters and it says shall taxes be increased? So mine actually says shall taxes be increased $36 million. But you've heard me use the number 32 million because that's actually what it's going to raise. But if you don't put a high enough number in that first sentence and taxes come in higher than what that number is, they have to get rebated back. That is what those two are about, both the homelessness tax and the climate tax estimated too low in the question. And so Lovely Tabor would require us to send some of that money back. And so those are two that will make next to no sense to you on the ballot because of how they have to be worded, but those are both really good ones to continue to support so that that money can keep going to homeless initiatives and to climate initiatives.
Are you saying that those are corrections to
They-
other initiatives in previous years?
Yep.
So it would
So
let
that
them
corrects
keep, it
the
would let them
number.
keep the money that they already.
Yeah, so in
cool.
2020, they were both on the ballot and the number was too
Estimated too
low.
low.
They brought in more money than they expected, and so they would have to refund that unless we allow them to keep it.
Great, thanks.
So I'm gonna wrap us up because we're over, but thank you all for being here. I want to say that all of these initiatives need your support in some way. So you could be text banking, you could be phone banking, you could be canvassing.
Ooh, can I talk on that just for 10 seconds, 30 seconds?
10.
So, this Saturday,
8.
we're having a coordinated campaign, Denver Deserves Sidewalks. no eviction without representation, and waste no more. And we do carry the 2I lit when we go out. And next Saturday, we're each launching individual canvases on Saturday, in different parts of the town, different hours of the day, carrying each other's lit, so that we're getting the message across to as many people. And we'd love to have you all join us. And for those who canvass for these 3 initiatives, we have an election night party with some extra freebies and stuff for the people who go knock on doors.
I would also be remiss if I did not tell you that I am a candidate for Denver City Council. And I will also be canvassing with no eviction without representation, with some lit. I'm not on this ballot. I'm on the April 2023 ballot. But on the next couple Sundays, and then also we'll be doing, I think, a coordinated with all 3 on November 5th. So would love to see y'all there for that. If you're here in person, we're gonna hang out. You can purchase things. We would love that. Hope Tank would love that support, and you get a 10% discount. If you are online, we'll post this video and we'll also share out the PDF of the document that we shared. Thank you so much, everyone, online, in person, and all the folks up here for all of your hard work for being here. We appreciate you.
Hey friends, thanks for hanging out. Really appreciate y'all being here. It's been a while since we got to see you. Talk to you soon.
So this thing was causing me to rock, which was causing that, the funding, so I kept trying to make it shorter.